My name's Richard Jurgens. I'm editor of the African Governance Papers at Good Governance Africa, and our executive director, Chris Marling, has asked me to present the results of our press release, which we compiled today, about the President's SONA 2022 speech last night. So overall, the speech includes some laudable attempts at addressing the ANC's lamentable record in governance over the past year, we would say, and in the longer term, but its lack of clarity and specificity in setting the tone for the country's governance year in some key areas of our country's life is deeply worrisome, and it's those that I want to outline briefly in this message. Turning to corruption and mismanagement, the President acknowledges the findings from the Zondo Commission, which have exposed the severe extent of state capture and related corruption that have pervaded the ANC's approach to government. That's good. But we maintain that corruption remains one of the greatest impediments to South Africa's growth and development because it disincentivizes investment through undermining the state's credibility and ability to honor contracts. We recognize that the President's speech is the first direct public statement that has been made by the ANC, acknowledging the first two parts of the Zondo Commission's reports. It also admits that state capture is a fact of the ANC's past approach to governance, and we laud the President for that. However, the speech leaves many serious issues unaddressed. It seems to imply that the ANC was infiltrated by a transnational crime syndicate, for instance, while the Zondo reports have already clearly identified state capture as a serious internal matter. This distancing is incongruous with the reality that the extent of the crime is clearly internal to the ANC. The President will need to act even if some of his own political allies are found to be complicit in the erosion of the state. Clear measures to improve institutional support and funding for the investigations and prosecutions that need to follow the revelations of the Zondo Commission's reports will be needed. If we turn to the legal system, we note too that the President's speech does not fully acknowledge the extent to which his own party has been an enabler in hollowing out the legal system. Indeed, it sometimes sounds as if he is talking about events out there over which he and his party have no control. Moreover, the President faces serious challenges in resolving the leadership crisis within the criminal justice system. An exact timeline for appointing a new head of the investigating directorate and the operationalization of the special courts is seriously needed. We might observe that while the speech uses stronger language as regards the findings of the Commission than last year's speech, the tone is still one of managing the fallout for the party, rather than addressing some of the most serious political issues which this country has faced in decades. So, for instance, turning to the issues of data and unemployment, two related issues. Our press release outlines more details about this, and I'll refer you to it. But the ANC's use of data, both as regards its own national census and as regards research by others, leaves much to be desired. For instance, the President's speech doesn't seriously recognize the extent of the sheer losses of private investment since 2008, which have adversely affected the sector's ability to create jobs. There's a strong need to base future policy and its implementation on evidence and data in the interests of accountability, transparency, and efficiency. If we turn to security, while the President acknowledges the recently published report of a panel of experts led by Professor Sandy Africa into the civil unrest in the middle of last year, it's a serious concern that he has articulated a complete change of narrative around the causes of the July riots as compared to the one he offered last year. There's a strong likelihood that prosecutions against those responsible for inciting the violence will include members of the ANC. Successful prosecutions against those who are responsible for the violence will be critical to deterring potential future efforts to destabilize the state, and they must be prioritized regardless of political sensitivities. The President mentions that he will address leadership changes within the State Security Agency, but structural reform is needed, not tinkering with appointments. Systemic issues relating to the security system of this country have been endemic for years with nothing done about them. And it might be said that the ANC's failure to pay attention to such issues has contributed significantly to the devastation caused by the riots of last year, which in fact might otherwise have been completely avoided. Turning to Eskom and the country's power supply, in last year's speech, the President noted that unreliable electrical supply was a threat to the country's economy, and that message hasn't changed this year. We need to point out, remember, that Eskom was a key conduit for state capture, as the Zondo Commission has indicated. And it's encouraging to hear the President announcing that more effort will be put into increasing competition in power supply, and also that his government is seriously working on alternative forms of energy. These are good things. However, we note that it is the state's policy missteps over decades that have resulted in this situation of poorly maintained power stations and the consequent load shedding, and lessons need to be learned about the path dependency of such big decisions so that such major errors are not committed in the future. There are other more technical issues relating to the electrical power supply, which we cover in our press release, and again I would refer you to that on our website for more details. But in conclusion, overall, GGA notes that the ANC's long-term history is bound up with a number of interconnected factors. One is its hostility to the private sector, another is corruption, yet another is cadre deployment, and finally its tolerance of incompetence in the execution of policy. These factors are interconnected and are the ultimate source of the ANC's governance failures over the last years. And President Ramaphosa in his speech recognizes only some of them. Addressing these issues is going to be key to putting things right. It's encouraging that there is emphasis on public-private partnerships, for instance, in a number of areas, but we must point out that these will be yet another tempting opportunity for corruption unless they are properly set up. For details on that, look at our press release. Corruption has been a factor in the ANC's failures of governance for decades, as I mentioned. It has been facilitated by cadre deployment and the tolerance of incompetence on the part of ANC decision makers. People are tired of excuses and rationalizations. They want to see political criminals in orange overalls and decision makers held accountable. Now, accountability cannot be achieved by an organization that adopts a collective responsibility approach internally. And the reason for this is simple. Collective responsibility is a denial of individual responsibility for performance. Without a change in this approach, the ANC cannot reform itself, and it will likely be either out of government or in very difficult coalitions within a few years. Finally, the President has set some deadlines in some areas, but avoided doing so in others. GGA will follow up on the deadlines set and will propose some approaches and timelines for the ones he hasn't addressed, specifically in following communications. So I hope you'll follow our publications on our website in the future.